Hey guys, Rebecca here from Changing Childhoods, and today I wanted to do a quick comparison and contrast of a Charlotte Mason hybrid school and a classical conversations community. Now, classical conversations has been around for a while, and Charlotte Mason has been around even longer, but as a set program, it has not. Most Charlotte Mason programs are independent and they're kind of grassroots programs, so they all look a little bit different. Okay, so first I'm going to explain what a classical conversations community roughly looks like, and then I'll explain what a Charlotte Mason hybrid can look like, and just kind of compare and contrast those two things. Now, classical conversations has been around for about 25 years. It was founded in the late 90s, and they have almost 2,000 communities around the country. So they've got a lot of momentum. They've been going on for a while. Now, they are very distinctive because they have their own set curriculum. They've designed their own curriculum based on their understanding of classical education in the trivium, which is that grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric stages of learning. And they've designed their own curriculum around that, and that's what's used in their communities. Their communities are independently licensed. The directors get a license. They are an LLC, and they then create a community. They have to, find the families for the community, and then they just implement the curriculum. Okay. Usually the tutors, they call them tutors, and those are the people who are actually leading the group. They're teaching, but they're just using the curriculum that's there. They're not like designing their own curriculum. And they are usually parents. Some of the parents might say, well, I can make a little bit of money as a tutor. You collect some bit of pay. I'm not really sure how much it is. I don't think it's very much at all, as far as it's not like a teaching salary or anything like that. But it can offset the costs of their own child attending. And we'll talk about costs in a minute. So they're implementing the curriculum. I'm going to talk about the younger years. Their challenge, which is their teenage high school curriculum, it's more weeks and it's a little more expensive. So I'm just going to talk about the early years and compare that. It meets for 24 weeks, once a week for 2 to 3 hours is my understanding. And the parents stay at the community. There's usually, a nursery that's staffed by one of the parents. The one that I visited and some of the ways that I've heard about them, because there are several around here. I've known people who've been in them, and I visited one several years ago. The parents are staying with the children, and then some are tutors, and then some might be staffing the nursery where the younger kids can go or whatever. So it's very communal in the sense that the parents are all there, the kids are all there. And I'm sure different communities might add on a lunchtime or, field trips and, other times. And so they can build this community around this core curriculum and this core format that's based on the classical conversations curriculum. So the trivium is the way that classical education is often described. And like I said, that's that grammar stage, dialectic stage, and the rhetoric stage. And that's roughly up to the age of 9, the kids are in the grammar stage, which is when they're learning classical conversations calls it, they're acquiring the knowledge for the tools later. And this is important when I talk about the distinction with Charlotte Mason and her approach to classical, which I would say is classical, but it's not classical conversations classical. I think they kind of have their own brand of it. There's a lot of memorization, and their curriculum is based largely on memorization in the early years. So there's songs and, chants, and there's scripted things that the children memorize. And they're memorizing math and grammar, and they're memorizing this knowledge. They're the hooks that they then apply as they get older. And then they move into, and they're encouraged to read books around all of that and all of that kind of thing. But that's the core of the curriculum is this memorization portion when the children are younger. Then they move into a stage where they're applying and doing the work more. And then in the rhetoric stage and their teenagers, the emphasis is on continuing to build up not just the information, but the application and the whole of the subject around those things that they memorized as younger children. And also in applying the, more advanced ability to think that older children have and teenagers have, to debate and, talk about ideas more. I have not observed that age in action. I only observe the younger kids in action. So that's part of why I'm focusing on that. Okay. So, it's a very, I don't want to say scripted, but it's kind of scripted. It's very predictable what they're learning when they're learning it. Okay. Throughout the phases. Okay. Now, as far as the cost, it's not one set cost for every community because there's building fees and, that might vary by community. But from the best that I can figure, it's often around $600 to $700 per year. It maybe even more, $600 to $800 maybe, by the time you pay like the fees that go to classical conversations, through your community, the building fee, the supply fee, and I think there's a registration fee. It will often add up to around $600 to $800. Okay. And then I believe there's still curriculum you have to purchase at home. And then some of the parents will try to offset that cost by becoming a tutor, which I believe there's, a small training for, but you really just are implementing the curriculum and leading the class. Okay. So that's classical conversations. Yeah. For Charlotte Mason hybrid, like I said, Charlotte Mason herself, the educator, died 100 years ago. Okay. So she's been around longer than classical conversations, but she was more of a philosopher. Okay. She did have many, many schools and she had teachers training. And she had like a series of books that the kids would work through in her schools. But Charlotte Mason was very much more about principles of education. So she would adapt. Not that classical conversations doesn't adapt, but she would adapt because she was very fundamentally like, here's what education really looks like. Children are persons, right? It's very philosophical in that sense. And the living books, ideas, truth. Okay. And classical, this is why I think classical, it applies to both models because classical conversations built on that like classical Christian there's truth and there's beauty and that like love of books and knowledge and history and humanity and all of that is part of both, in my opinion. Okay. So, but Charlotte Mason hybrid schools, and that's what I want to talk about, is the application in that model because the reason that I'm comparing these two is because they both serve homeschooling families. Okay. Classical conversation families are homeschooling and they're using this as like their core curriculum in their community. Okay. Now, Charlotte Mason hybrids, and I'm going to use mine as an example, the one that I co-founded, are also serving homeschool families and doing so with a part-time sort of program. So let me tell you how that one works. Okay. Now, like I said, there's not thousands of communities around like these, although it would be super cool. This is more of a part-time school in the sense that there's hired teachers and the kids are going to school. And in the model, it can be different ways, but I'm just going to talk about the 2-day model because that's a very common hybrid model, whether it's Charlotte Mason classical or whatever, 2-day model is very common. It's a drop-off 2-day program where the kids essentially just go to school 2 days a week and they are learning any number of subjects, usually pretty much all of the basic subjects from a little bit of memory work. A lot of them are Christians. There's like a Bible portion, like a faith portion, math, reading, probably some spelling. Ours does not cover a lot of grammar because we ran out of time. So that's mostly done to help. But history, science, nature study, arts, composer study, it's all in those 2 days. Okay. It's like 2 regular full days of school. Okay. And it is a drop-off program in that sense that the parents drop the kids off just like they would at any school and then they go home. Okay. In our program and in most of the hybrids that I know of, it is not a cooperative model. CC, which is Classical Conversations, CC, is more of a cooperative model because they're, as far as I know, they do not go hire someone else from outside the community to be the teacher. It's cooperative, although there is pay. So it's not cooperative in the sense of like a homeschool co-op where no one's really getting paid. You're all just cooperating and taking a job. Okay. Which is that's kind of a different model. CC kind of is like in the middle a little bit. but it still leans more toward the cooperative model because the parents just all pitch in and, help with things, cleaning up and setting up and, watching the kids and recess and lunch and, all of that. So, but in a Charlotte Mason hybrid or a hybrid, we'll just talk about that part first. It's a drop-off program with employees. And, there's a lot of different other types of models that might do multi-age and all of that. But like in our program, it's still great. There's kindergarten, first, second, third. There's teachers for each of those. There's director, there's aides. And it just looks a lot like private school, and it's drop-off program. Okay. Now, as far as the Charlotte Mason philosophy part of it, like I said, I think Charlotte Mason was definitely classical in the sense that it was rooted in humanities and history and good books and understanding your identity as a person in humanity and history and all of that good stuff. Okay. And she was a Christian, so she was very rooted in God and truth. And in fact, that's like the foundational part of her education philosophy is that the Holy Spirit is really who informs education. And there is no education that is not really the Spirit working through the spirit of the child, right? And the person. And that's that personhood. So I'm not going to go on the whole thing about Charlotte Mason's philosophy. And I don't think that classical disagrees with Christian classical, does not disagree with that. Okay. Foundationally, I think that is the same. Okay. But the way she applied it was not the way classical conversations applied it, especially in the younger years from my experience. Okay. One, Mason's method generally delays formal academics until around 7 years old, where classical conversations isn't as, they're as soon as a kid wants to memorize, if they're 4 years old, 3 years old, that's fine. Kids at that age memorize very easily. So why not go for it, right? Mason was more about experience, like it was very much core to her building of the personhood of the child, that they don't get pushed into any kind of academics too early. So she wanted them to experience life and things and be outside and, be in relationships with people and learn good habits of attention, habits of obedience. She talks about all of that. And then around 7, then you start having some more formal academics, but short lessons. And she used a memorization, but it was not like, you memorize this, you've gone, you memorize for 3 or 4 years and you've got, once you're 10, now you can move into the next stage. It wasn't that like that. Okay. It was, the kids were reading good books. And from the very beginning of the academic lessons, it was about the ideas that the children were grasping from the books and the experiences that they were having. Okay. So they're working with items as they learn their math, and so that they understand they understand the idea because they're actually doing it with pennies or little, items with their math. And they're reading books and listening to books and grasping ideas, writing narrations. When they're really young, they're just telling back what they heard in their own words. So this is very different from what classical conversations would look like, because instead of reciting a script, like classical conversations does in the younger years, which then gets in their mind, and then later they can pull that back up again. And I have a respect for that for sure. But Mason's approach would be you're reading good books with good vocabulary and, with it from a teacher who has a passion for the subject. And then you're asking the child to tell back what they heard from it, which it kind of forces them to attach to some idea that was in what they heard and tell it back. And it's a lot of work to tell back a story if you've never tried it before. So you start that from the time they're 7, and it takes several years for them to really be able to get really excellent narrations. But because they're sometimes some kids are naturals at it, but it's okay. It takes a couple of years for them to give these lovely narrations. And then they also, learn to write their narrations as they get a little older. And they're introduced to grammar and stuff a little later, like maybe 9 or 10. Not grammar in the sense of the classical stage, but grammar in the sense of English grammar. Because she was they're reading and they're listening and they're speaking first for several years, the English language, excellent English language, not watered down. And by the time they get to be, 9 or 10, they can just they can learn the principles of grammar very quickly because they've been listening and using the English language for so long. And then you can just apply the principles of grammar and they understand it, the rules of grammar. So those are just some examples, but the key difference, I would say, is the emphasis in a Mason education on a lot of really good books and on the child grasping the ideas and on habits of attention and on narration. Okay. Those are just some of the main ideas. Okay. As opposed to what I described for classical conversations with the emphasis on memory work in early years. Okay. And also the delayed academics in the not delayed. I wouldn't call it delayed. It's just not pushing it early because you're making sure the child has a foundation, several years of experience and, physical and social training experience. I don't want to call it training, but it is training. It is training also, but exposure and experience before they're having to emphasize, spend a lot of time on these other things. And then she also had an emphasis, like you do short lessons in the morning on those academic subjects, and then you spend your afternoons learning. She would call it handicrafts. The principle behind it, in my opinion, was learning practical things to do that were creative, that were useful, okay, which looked different in 1980 than they do, or 1880, than they did in 1980 or now, okay? Maybe different, some the same, some different. Okay, so philosophically, those are the differences. And as far as I'll go back to the hybrid model, I just talked about that already, but let's talk a little bit about the cost of it. Okay, so if let's say you had the choice between a classical conversations community and a 2-day Charlotte Mason hybrid. Okay, the main differences would be, and again, this is for younger kids, in a CC community, it would be meeting for 24 weeks for about, I believe, 2 or 3 hours, like in the morning or whatever. And the cost would be around $700. We're just going to go with those numbers because I think that's about average. And in again, this isn't a set model everywhere, but like, let's say in the hybrid that I co-founded, they're meeting for 33 weeks, 2 days a week for 6 hours a day. So 12 hours a week as opposed to 2 or 3. And it's the drop-off program. Obviously, it costs more. Okay, ours, I'm going to say $3,000 just for the ease of the numbers. Ours is right around there. Actually a little under that. And most are a little more, 3,200 to 3,400, I think is the average for a 2-day hybrid. But ours also isn't 36 weeks. So I think that's part of why it's a little less. So obviously, if you're just looking at the number, CC is cheaper. But if you're looking at what your opportunity cost is in the sense of how much time you are getting childcare, because school is childcare, right? There, if you're dropping your child off and someone else is caring for them, and you can go to work or you can go do something else, then that is childcare. Mason hybrid, any kind of hybrid drop-off program is going to be providing that service as well. Okay. So when I kind of divided out the numbers, which the easiest thing to do is kind of look at per hour because it's not the same number of weeks and days and stuff. It's actually cheaper per hour to do a Mason hybrid because it around those numbers that I just described, roughly $7 an hour versus around $8 an hour. And you don't have to stay. So the total cost is more, but the cost per hour is less. Okay. You still have to buy some curriculum at home in our program. And so, there is a cost there. And so if you were trying to decide which one you wanted to, if you could choose between the two, let's say they're the same distance away and you had to choose, your schedule, how much you want to be there and doing yourself as a parent, and the cost are probably going to be your major decision, makers. And also the philosophy, right? If you want to do that CC model that's very memory heavy in the early years and then moves up through those classical stages, that there it is. It's all scripted for you in the CC model. And I think they have conferences and stuff like that. But if you want more of that, more gentle, I think it's more gentle in the sense that it's more rigorous in some ways as far as the program because the kids are getting dropped off twice a week for a whole day, if that's how you're formatting it. And they're in school and they're learning to participate in class and, deal with social stuff at recess and lunch and all of that kind of thing. They're learning all of that without their parent around. So there's this other aspect to it that a lot of parents really like. but other parents don't. So, it depends on whether what you're looking for in the service. Okay. And then and I got a little distracted there with the other service there, but as far as the curriculum, like if you want a lot of really good books from a young age and a lot of time outdoors as part of the program, all of that would be more of a Mason hybrid. Okay. It's also more robust just because there's like 4 times more hours a week, that are spent in the community. But there's also maybe a little less community for the adult because you're dropping your kids off and going home. So unless which I highly recommend, and we've done this after a couple of years, either if the program's really small or as it's able to grow, you can build in, seminars and field trips and, fall festival parties and, Christmas parties and all kinds of things where you can build community among the parents. But it doesn't come as naturally as if you're all just hanging out, watching your kids do the CC thing and having lunch together. That's more of a let's do it all together as families sort of model. Okay. So there's my compare and contrast. And hopefully that helps a little bit if you don't have a Mason hybrid in your community, which you probably don't. But if you don't, there's a description of what it can look like. And, we started one from the ground up, just a grassroots. We had no model to follow, and it was most certainly a lot of work. But now there are ours is, booming, and there's others around. And so and I'm trying to create resources on my website at start-a-hybrid-school.com and Changing Childhoods that would help you start a Mason hybrid school if you would like to do that. And make sure that you subscribe and follow any other videos that are coming out in the future. And I would love to hear from you. So shoot me an email sometime.